we have in our lineup today Sonia Walton and Maxine Valsaman from the Queen's University, Canada. They are both the managing editor and publications coordinator of the Journal of Military Veteran and Family Health. And then a while ago, Hannah talked, but she will be representing Anglia Ruskin University and the Journal of War and Culture Studies. So she's one of the co-editor. And we have Alex Waterman here as well, from University of Bradford, and he's a co-editor of the Civil Wars Journal. They're gonna have like each of us like 10 minutes to just explain your role, explain what the journal is all about, and some of your top tips for some of our researchers. Because Oliver is not here yet, would Sonia and Maxime would like to start? Is that okay with you guys? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Floor's for you.
Sure, I'll go first. Who doesn't love going first in a webinar? Good morning, I'm Sonia Walton from the Journal of Military, Veteran, and Family Health, as Anne already introduced. I'm the managing editor, did I say that? It's 7 a.m. over here, I'm sorry guys. I guess just a few things I wanted to touch on are the importance of publishing for career growth, some top tips about what we're really looking for when you submit an article. And then if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those, or I guess if we're doing those at the end, I don't know. But whatever you prefer. So as we all know, universities and research institutes evaluate candidates in part on their publication record. So it's really important to get published. And also for funding and grant applications, it's really important to have a strong publication record to show that you're contributing new knowledge to your field. It's important to build a reputation for yourself and by publishing in good journals. So, you know, we're a good journal. That's all. No, that's, so some journals will just desk reject if you don't follow author guidelines. And so I guess the most important thing I wanted to say is the most critical thing you can do is actually read through all the author guidelines on any journal's website. And I see Alex nodding because he knows my pain. There are lots of little instructions in there, and the closer you are to following those, the higher your chances of actually getting your article read are. You know, there are instructions on how to form your abstract. Like there might be even, you know, specific word length guidelines. Well, obviously there will be. Just read, just for the, if you take away nothing else from this webinar, read the author guidelines. It's really, really important. Other things you can do are to help you follow word guidelines are, you know, be a word economist. When you don't have to say 12 words or use a big word, just make it smaller. Smaller is better. What else can I think of at this early hour? I think that's really it for me. I'm Sonia Walton, and I say follow the author guidelines. Now, top that, you other fellows. No, really, that's it. I'll get my cat back here. She can do a little.
Maxime, like you work on the same journal, right? With Sonia.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so yes, I'm Maxwell Samus, and thank you, Hannah, and the rest of the team for inviting us as well to take part in this panel. And yes, I'm the publications coordinator for the Journal of Military and Veterans Family Health. And just, I guess, a bit more on the journal itself. So we are an organization, or like the journal is ran under CIMVAR, and that's the Canadian Institute of Military and Veterans Health Research. And we are tied in some capacity to Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. And the journal itself is now in its 11th year of publication. And we are up to publishing 5 issues per year. We started off at 2 all the way back about a decade ago. And thankfully, in some ways, we have grown. So it's quite nice to be able to publish, roughly 5 publications per year. ever since almost. And then we typically have 3 regular editions and 2 special editions per year. And that roughly equates to about 60 to 75 articles published in JMVFH on a yearly basis. And yeah, we are read in approximately 170 countries around the world. So we are very much a great avenue to publish for aspiring authors like some of yourselves. So yes, as Sonia said, kind of please do keep us in mind as a place where if your research deals with whether it's physical or mental health primarily, then that's kind of what we try to emphasize our scope on as it relates to military personnel, veterans, and their families, of course, as very much our journal title sort of points out. And then, yes, basically the 3 kind of things I also wanted to just quickly focus on in this brief introduction is one has already kind of been mentioned, but the word limit is something that very much also not only depends on the journal, but in our case, we accept roughly 10 different types of manuscripts. So we have research papers and review papers, which are quite lengthy, so to speak, within our context. So those are the longest ones. They typically vary around 4,000 to 4,500 words. But then we also accept manuscripts which are quite shorter in length. And sometimes authors, if they just sort of look at the first entry, which is the research paper, then they kind of sort of assume that everything following that on our website might have the exact same word limit. And so that becomes a problem because they clearly don't. And so, yes, they can be quite short. So we have, for instance, perspective papers or something called an info brief, which has more to do with even, or infographic, excuse me, as well, which have to do more with almost comparing sort of very brief entry points with then a graph or some kind of table that you're trying to really reveal numbers in, as well as a statistic maybe from having done interviews or a survey, for instance. And so that can be kind of capped at 1,500 words. So very limited sometimes as well. So that's kind of just something that one needs to keep in mind as they really look at different manuscript types, even within one journal, and then of course bouncing around between different journals in which you might try to publish your work. And then the second big thing I wanted to kind of highlight is focusing very much on your abstract. So we did hold JMVFH sort of a webinar a couple of months ago, very much focusing on, you know, the importance of writing good, strong abstracts. And basically, it too has a word limit in our case, and I'm assuming that's, you know, pretty consistent as well around the world. And so maintaining kind of that balance between highlighting key components of what your research will explain within the entire submission and manuscript, but of course in a very concise way is not easy, but is something that I encourage everyone to really spend, you know, prioritize basically. So even though it seems like maybe an afterthought for a lot of people, or, you know, the research is really where I spent the majority of my time and of course energy in some ways over the months makes a lot of sense. But when you're really ready to submit that sort of final paper or that submission to a journal, then don't just kind of rush through the abstract, because oftentimes peer reviewers, or prior to that really, of course, even the journal receiving your manuscript, they will focus somewhat on the abstract to really determine if that is something else they want to then, you know, carry on with as a manuscript for then potential publication in your journals. So essentially, the abstract needs to be very detailed in what is, once again, a small amount of words. So it's not always easy, but if you have something like a sample size that you have, once again, based off of having done a survey, or whether it's interviews with particular veterans. If you know things like their gender, which probably as the one having asked the questions, if it is interview style, then you know about. If it's important that it's like a specific geographical location, even within your country, right? Canada is extremely large. So if the interviews were based out west in British Columbia, well, that's something that the audience would like to know, that it's not actually catering to the entire country, where you're taking this data from. So even those kind of small things, if you add them into your abstract rather than just saying I did interviews, you can see how it has like a different impact, and just offers way more advice and information to your audience, and at the initial stage intake for the editorial team and so on. And then the last thing I would like to sort of highlight for us is basically as well that in our case, as I quickly mentioned at the start, we're very focused on mental and physical health. So knowing really the key components, or sort of the scope and the purpose of the journal that you're applying to, is critical. So if if that tie is not evident in our case, then that's typically when we unsubmit a paper or kind of reject it outright, because there just simply isn't a strong enough tie to what your journal is representing. So that doesn't mean it's not a well-written paper. It doesn't mean it's not a well-researched paper either. However, if the aim and scope just don't align strongly enough with the journal you submitted your manuscript to, then you are kind of at risk of being rejected from there. And then sometimes journals do offer alternative possibilities, or if they're aware that, like, having read your abstract or your entire paper, feeling like maybe they do want to offer up an alternative, it's possible, but sometimes they don't. And yeah, we don't always either, for instance. So it just makes it harder sometimes, of course, on the individual to do a bit more homework on their end, at the beginning. But it does go a long way, because of course no one necessarily likes that rejection email, for instance. But if you kind of know maybe just a bit more, even, so to speak, your audience, now not from the written format, but yeah, that journal you're applying to submit a manuscript, that can be kind of a small but critical component as well in just having your manuscript have a higher chance of being published. Of course, there's no guarantees yet either, but it's an added element that I encourage people to consider. And then so that's kind of a bit of a summary of sort of main key points. And I know that just prior to kind of getting together for this panel, Hannah had also kind of asked if we have any sort of tips or insider information on special editions as well, specifically, which as I highlighted, we do offer 2 per year at GMVFH. So basically, how those sort of topics are gathered on our side is pretty much twofold. And on the one end, we typically, so at Simvar, our sort of parent company, once again, we host an annual conference where we expect typically to have anywhere between 200 to upwards of 275 different presentations. And we really gather, a lot of information from that as to what is possibly, very prevalent topics at the moment, whether they're tied to sort of policy making as well, or current events in the world, specific wars, of course, as well. So we often, as a sort of editorial team, will meet and discuss something we can draw from that as a potential upcoming special issue. So it's not necessarily that We just sort of want to highlight some of the presentations per se. So we're not doing like a proceedings, but more the subject matter. We see that maybe there's a stream of papers all related to the sort of same issue at large. And so that could be one way that we go about it. Otherwise, we also do take recommendations or suggestions from our contributors. So for instance, if anyone even here today said they have something that they really wanted to sort of hone in on as a potential special topic, then we do kind of take that into account. We do report back to sort of our team once again, or I'm also someone that often goes to conferences on our behalf, whether it's the journal or for SIMVAR specifically, and sometimes as exhibitors as well. So if people kind of come to our booth and they say we have an idea, then we definitely try to discuss it. Yes, as I say, with the editorial team, and then it may or may not lead to kind of the creation of a special edition. So something that keep in mind, if you have good ideas, don't be afraid to basically reach out to sort of that journal that you might want to collaborate with in that sense, because you never know, they might just sort of take it back to their group, and maybe within a month later they kind of give you the green light that this is a possibility. And the only thing kind of I want to add to that is that timeline of production can be quite sort of lengthy. So if a topic might be accepted, kind of as an idea conceptually, like right now in May 2025, it's highly possible that sort of special issue is only published, kind of a year and a half, 2 years down the line, or if there is already a bit of a lineup in terms of, in our case, we might know all of next year already as well, because it is only 2 issues. Well, keep in mind that your idea that's accepted, kind of in principle, is getting pushed down in terms of when that sort of may be published, and you can see kind of the fruition of it. So if your topic is very relevant in the moment, you might need to shop around your idea as well, because journals might have that kind of backlog of, well, we already have assigned special issues. So something to exactly kind of just everyone to be aware of, that if you kind of want more the journal brand, then you might be okay with sort of 3 years down the line, for instance. But if you're thinking more now is the time and someone else can offer that sooner, then that's kind of an alternative. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, and let the others also have a chance at sharing some great insight, I'm sure. So thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Maxine. Thank you, Sonia and Maxine from the Journal of Military Veterans and Family Health. We've got a lot of info on how to probably submit a journal article with the JBMH. Oliver is now in the call, so if you would just so yeah, would you like to round up next?
Yeah. Hi everybody. Thanks for your attention, and thanks for the first talk. I have to say I've learned a lot already, so brilliant, and I'll be reaching out. I would echo Sonia's point about author guidance. So I'm speaking on behalf of the BMJ Military Health, which is a UK BMJ group publication, which initially was founded in 1903 as the Journal of the Royal Army Medical Corps. So our history and our predecessor, goes back quite a long way. And in the beginning, it was almost, a bit parish notice and a bit like, let's tell you what's going on, back in the day. And over time, it's become more scientific and more rigorous. But we still see the latest iteration as the repository for the medical research from the Defence Medical Services. It was formed and amalgamated with the Journal of the Royal Navy Medical Services about 5 or 6 years ago. So in its current iteration, it's a relatively new title, but obviously it goes back a long way. We have very good editorial assistants. So if you don't meet the author guidance, you'll get an email the next day and it'll be unsubmitted. I've been submitting there for a long time. I was invited to join the editorial board a few years ago, and I was promoted to an assistant editor role last year. Every single submission I've ever done across that time, it always gets returned to me, and it's like a code, and I haven't yet cracked it. But they're very good at telling you what you have not done, and then you change it and you resubmit it. So if it happens to you, don't be surprised. It happens to me, and it happens to many other people. But that means that by the time you get down the line, hopefully you're not upsetting the editor and the peer reviewers, because the editorial assistants have already swept up the deliberate mistakes you've left in there for them to find. I would just say, however, one of the deepest frustrations shared by the editor-in-chief is if you're submitting to the journal having been rejected at a different journal, please do reformat it accordingly, because the amount of times that you get stuff that is formatted for a different journal and it's apparently obvious, and we get it, and we all do it ourselves, don't we? You know, we apply somewhere and we don't get in, and then we go to the next place, and so on and so forth. But if it appears exactly how it was without being reformatted, that is never kind of a positive start. So I would echo Sonia, and I would just amplify that. So our scope is really the widest applicability to medicine. So clinical medicine is often what we deliver it within the Defence Medical Services. You know, we care for serving personnel across all three services. And so a lot of what we publish is clinically focused. However, obviously you need to make scientific discoveries to drive clinical innovation. So therefore it isn't always clinical medicine. A lot of it is research based, and a lot of it, you know, can be lab or modeling or quali, or, you know, experience and expectation, and, you know, things like that. So our scope is pretty wide. Because of our roots with both the Journal of the Royal Army Medical Corps and the Journal of the Royal Navy Medical Service, one of the unique features of our journal, which causes the BMJ group slight consternation, is the fact that we are really keen to invite young researchers and those who are more junior in their career, and at times would say, you know, the paper is not ready yet. These are the things you need to do to make it ready. In a different title, you might just get a desk reject, whereas we believe that there's a nurturing role that we hold, and it's dear to us. And I've benefited from that, and, you know, I think we all agree that, you know, we're keen to keep the ladder down. So, you know, if you've never submitted somewhere else, or you've only submitted a couple of papers, you know, we welcome your submission as much as someone who's been submitting papers for years and decades. We have a monthly journal, which you can get in paper form and you can get online. And then we have generally between 0 and 2 or 3 special issues a year. So, you know, there's quite a lot of content, and there's quite a lot of stuff that comes out. And as I say, you can get it paper form or you can get it online. We also offer webinars and podcasts. They are slightly more challenging, but there are some hosted on the website, and our website contains all the kind of author guidance that you need. Similar, I think, to what we've just heard, we offer 10 different types, and they go from original research, full-length manuscripts, and our full length is about 3,000 words. And that includes, you know, review articles and what we call analysis pieces. So that might not be traditional original research, but a challenging of a paradigm or a new development or a new innovation. And then all the way to kind of letters and what we call footnotes and endnotes. And so, you know, historical pieces we welcome. And so, you know, it might not be traditional in a scientific journal, but because of our roots and our shared traditions and our shared memory, we think that's important. Something that we have that other journals do as well is a kind of key message summary. So on top of everything that you've already written, your manuscript and your abstract, but 3 key messages. And generally speaking, they are distilled down into what is known, what this adds and how will it influence research, policy, or practice. So we can have very explicit take-home messages that people can just read, and they sit generally below the abstract, and that gives them a real flavour of what you want as an author to think about. In my experience, these are often the things you do last, and sometimes these are things that are done in a bit of a hurry, and when you read that, you can sometimes read that. So I would advise you to take a bit of time to think about what is the thing that is new for you, and try not to just cut and paste a line from your methods and your discussion, but kind of summarize that in a sentence or two. One of the challenges we face, and one of the challenges that all journals face, is that of peer reviewers. And I was just flicking through the excellent guidance on the Journal of Military, Veteran and Family Health, and you say you want 5 peer reviewers, which is great. We ask for 2, and what I would say is, please, can they be appropriate reviewers? So don't just put a big name in the field who's too busy to review it. Our biggest delay is the reviewers, and I think that's common for everybody. So the editors will drive it as much as they can, but until we hear back, and we operate a double-blind 2 peer review process, generally speaking, for the full manuscripts. And occasionally we'll ask for a 3rd or a specialist statistician review when appropriate. So if you can give us appropriate and ones that aren't kind of conflict of interest, then that's really helpful for us. And then we will use our own kind of informal networks and our own specialist knowledge and other methods to get the amount of reviews until we've had enough. Typically, a handling editor will deal with the paper and then pass their comments, and those are the peer reviewers up to the editor-in-chief to work on. And as I say, we welcome submissions from everywhere along your research journey. So, don't be intimidated. We are a friendly bunch. If you want to email us and reach out ahead of time and say, this is what I want to consider putting in, what do you think about that? Great, do that. The editor-in-chief has just changed from Lieutenant Colonel John O'Breeze to Surgeon Commander Jason Smith. So the journal probably will have a bit of new kind of opportunities and exciting new things that happen because of the nature of a change in leadership. But the core is the same. We believe in the kind of the widest possible application of medicine, military medicine, the nurturing of junior researchers, and the strict adherence to all author guidance. Anyone, any questions? I also have a dog down here if we're doing pet shows as well.
Thank you, Ollie. We'll have like a short Q&A after, when all of the authors have, all of the editors have spoken. Would Hannah want to go next?
Super, yeah. I have got a couple of slides, largely because I knew I'd just veer off if I didn't. So I'll see if I can get those up. Is that showing you? What is that showing you? Just the slide? I can see all my slides, but okay, that's fine. Super. So yeah, I'm here representing the Journal of War and Culture Studies. So I used to, and this I think is perhaps useful to know for an ECR audience too. I started off as an ECR doing their social media. So they had an editorial board, but they'd always had one person just doing social media from like PGR, ECR, and that's the role that I initially was asked to do. And then after doing that for a couple of years, somebody left from the editorial team and they asked me to step up to that. So I've only been doing it for the last couple of months. And I've learned a lot along the way. So I used to just go to the editorial meetings just to work out what special issues were coming out, and I wouldn't stay for the final kind of go through all of the articles. I now stay for all of that, and yeah, it's been really interesting. So yeah, I just wanted to talk to you. I've got quite a busy slide next. I made this ages ago. We haven't actually used it as a journal yet. I think it's a little bit too busy. But anyway, since I knew aims and scope was going to come up, I thought I'd use it because I have it. But you can find this all on the Taylor and Francis journal. So you can, if you search for the Journal of War and Culture Studies, you can find all of this. But I think it came from, we want to put something out on social media to, continue to just promote exactly the points people have already talked about, the importance of just making sure that you're choosing the right journal for your article. So definitely reading what the aims and scope are. For us, obviously, being war and culture studies, a reason often for rejection initially is because a paper is clearly more of a war paper or more of a culture paper and doesn't necessarily fit war and culture studies. So yeah, that's the main thing I wanted to convey there. I'm not going to dwell on that slide because I think you can look that up if you're interested in submitting. I thought I'd briefly say something about what happens to your article. And I have got this as a point somewhere else as well, but a lot of the publishing websites have a really good, and I know that Taylor and Francis in particular, but and we're about to put up a blog post. In fact, I may have already made it live, a blog post on the DRN website about the different publishing organisations and the resources that they provide. Because a top tip is to look there. They've some great resources about how to prepare your article, what things to look for, this kind of thing. So I'm not going to talk about it at length, but I think it's useful to know, like for our journal, we have a monthly editorial board meeting. So if you submit your article, in the middle of a month, then by the end of that month, we will have looked at all the articles that have come in. And that initial look by the editorial team, so that's 4 of us for our journal, and we all have a read of the articles before we come to that meeting. We then go through them and decide whether or not we want to proceed to send them out to review, or whether or not they're a rejection at that stage. I've been really surprised, I suppose, in now being more exposed to that process, how many are rejected straight away, and those rejections being attributed to the things that have already come up, really mainly not reading the author guidelines and therefore it not being the right journal for the article, or submitting some kind of submission that doesn't meet what the journal's asking for. And we really just have the traditional format articles. So yeah, we have had someone repeatedly submitting short poems, and have told them a number of times that that's not a format we accept. So I feel sorry that they keep submitting them, because I think, I'm not sure they're getting the message. So anyway, that's that first sift, and then the article would go out for peer review, and the rest you probably be more familiar with. Obviously we receive those reviews back, and that's when you'll sort of hear from us. So there's a couple of questions. The next slide, just sort of questions to ask yourself, I think, early on prior to submission, and there's nothing surprising here based on what people have already said, but I think, is this journal the best fit for your article? Where one of the tips someone said to me early on is think about where the articles you're reading, and particularly the articles that you're referencing for the piece you're preparing, where are they published? That's probably a good starting point. Whatever it is that's in your reading list, if your work is building on that work, then that's a good place to look. I certainly learned this lesson. My first article was rejected. I went for an International Feminist Journal of Politics, and really it wasn't a good fit for that. I can see that in hindsight, but then you have to go through that awful demoralizing process of first article rejection, midway through the PhD, and I think that's a important lesson. And I've heard many people, in fact, Alex, I think you've said this to me in the past, is about having to go to multiple journals with a particular article just to kind of find that fit, but knowing that there is a home for your article somewhere, and then just keeping going, trying to find that right home for it. And I think, if you haven't already got the message about instructions for authors, but some specific things there around, are you using the right referencing system? This does drive me a bit nuts. As soon as journals in general go for so long as it's consistent across your article approach, the better. Being someone who publishes interdisciplinary, moving from a history journal to a social science one, and switching from footnotes to in-sentence citations, just, such a waste of time. Spend a full day to do that, if not more. But anyway, we are where we are at the moment. Check you've got the right referencing system. Is the article the right length? Have you formatted it in the way that the journal's asking for it? And then the other slides I've really got here is one of kind of top tips, things I've sort of learned or picked up along the way from the position as part of the editorial team, but also just with my own publications. I think, you know, if you're at that sort of first few articles stage of thinking about getting to that stage, you know, definitely find someone you can share your draft article with. That's a great way to get feedback. I think people will be very willing. If you're willing to read one of theirs, they'll be willing to read one of yours. So and it's such a help. So that's a good idea before submitting. I always try and use a conference because it's like another step of, especially if the discussant for your panel is, you know, they should be reading your paper and giving you some written feedback on it. It's pretty much the norm. And if not that, some audience feedback. But that's a great way of just a check before you're going to submit it. So I usually use a conference as a way to drive me to have some sort of draft paper, then get the feedback and go from there. I've also benefited, and particularly with the Journal of War and Culture Studies before I had any involvement with them, in ECR workshops that they've run. Particularly, obviously, you know, there's events like today kind of meet the editors, ask some questions, but sometimes journals will host a kind of workshop where you can bring a draft paper along. That's really helpful, really worth looking out for, especially if they've got some kind of track to a special issue. And that I benefited from that. Journal of War and Culture Studies did an ECR special issue about future new wars, something like that. So they're really worth looking out for. Another thing I definitely learned, we've had a bit of mention of special issues, but I think being involved in a special issue, if the opportunity arises to work with a small team to co-edit a special issue, I was fortunate to do that with some more experienced editors as part of during my PhD, and I learned so much, not least seeing all the feedback for everyone else's papers at that stage in my time in academia. I hadn't I'd only seen my own feedback, but when you're involved in coordinating that feedback for a whole group of papers, you start to realize that actually, you know, the professors get this kind of feedback too, and it's quite healthy, and you can, you know, learn a bit more about what sorts of things are kind of consistent feedback that you then can take on board for your own writing. I also really embrace opportunities to co-author. I think doing a PhD is really isolating. You know, you're obviously working on your own, but if an opportunity comes about to co-author with someone else, I think it's just a really nice thing to do during your PhD or a postdoc or something where you're working on your own. If you can find someone else to do some writing with, for me, that's been a really positive experience. Much easier in a way to move forward with, so long as obviously you get on well with the person you're working with, or you've got something, you know, good to work on together. But then you've almost got a sort of fellow, you know, you can sort of edit for each other and give feedback. And I find it's a lot easier to take the any rejection or feedback when there's someone else to work it through with as well. You're not just sat with it on your own. In fact, that's another tip that I haven't put down here, but that I've just remembered and thought of, which I don't know what anyone else does, but when I get feedback, whatever kind of rejection or minor feedback, whatever, I always just park it. I just think, what was the outcome? Nervously look at it, and I think, okay, I'll come back to that. And then I just give myself a little bit of time when I'm ready to go through it. And often it looks horrific. Even when it says minor revisions, it can look terrible. And then actually when you get into it and break it down, make a table, how am I going to address this? It's never as bad as it seems, I think, in most cases. I already mentioned check out the publisher resources, and you can look at it. There'll be a blog post. I can't remember if it's not up already on our website. It'll be there soon. And there's some amazing stuff on the publishing websites. So really good guidance. If you've not published at all, I would recommend just looking through that. There's a lot hidden there. And something else I found useful is asking colleagues what their experience of publishing with a particular journal was like. I'm just branching out into publishing in some history journals. So I've been asking historians that are friends of mine, you know, I see you've published with them. What was that like? Was it quick? Was it positive experience? That kind of thing. So that's been very helpful. And just one final slide, really. I think I'm actually already mentioned one of these. You know, we all have articles rejected. As I said, my first one was rejected, and many more since. And sometimes it's just as simple as finding the right home for your paper. But another thing I actually read on Twitter years ago, but has stayed with me, and I find a helpful thought, is even if you're writing a single authored article, if you think of it as a collaborative endeavor and the reviewers are a part of the process that helps that article develop, somehow thinking of it like that helps me to not think that it's some kind of combative, negative process, and that actually they're just trying to help you move your article on. So yeah, hope there's some things I picked up that hopefully are helpful. And that's all from me. And how on earth do I stop sharing? I will hand over to Alex. Oh, there we go, found it.
Thank you, Anna. Yes, Alex, if you want to share your slides as well, I know you've prepared something.
Sure,
for
thank
the
you.
audience.
Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm Alex Waterman. I am one of the co-editors of the journal Civil Wars. I've been co-editor since January 2022. A little bit about me. So I completed my PhD in 2018. So joining the journal as co-editor in 2022, reasonably early career. I thought it was a really useful window into the publishing process. So hopefully, I have a lot of slides here. I'm going to kind of fly through them with the broad summaries of each slide. But if there's anything that you find that you want to dig into in more detail, please do just make a note of it, and we'll raise it and we'll have a discussion in the Q&As. So first thing that I wanted to touch upon is that it's fine for articles to emerge from PhD research. It's totally, when you're doing your PhD, you will have work that you want to submit for publication, and that's fantastic. That's often where some of the most cutting edge research that we get actually comes from. Now, there are significant differences, however, between a journal article and a PhD chapter. Do not simply submit a PhD chapter because we can tell. So a PhD is, if you think about it, you're writing for your examiners. You're writing to a particular set of assessment criteria to demonstrate knowledge and skills to an exam committee. Whereas writing for publication, you're writing for a broader audience. So think about things like literature reviews are going to be less dense. They're going to be less methodical, working through the entire literature and then arriving at a gap and arriving at an argument. Your argument in a journal article is going to be up top, and then your literature review work is your demonstration of that argument is going to follow. Literature reviews are going to be far more concise. You have word limits to work with, so chapters in PhD theses can range from anything between 5,000 to 6,000 through to 27,000. A recent one that I've worked with. So journal articles are rarely going to be that long. So you might want to consider, when thinking about what material can I publish from my PhD, a section within a chapter rather than a chapter itself. So journal articles get to the point much more quickly than PhD research, which is about showing that sort of process to your exam committee. So choosing a journal, there's been some really useful thoughts on this so far already. I don't want to repeat too much of it, but yeah, again, as Hannah mentioned, speak to friends and colleagues about particular journals, profile editorial teams, have a look at, when you're at conferences, are there editors attending? If they're doing panels such as this, go to them and have conversations, and contact them via email as well, and say, look, I've got this idea. Can we get a coffee and have a conversation about it? That's one thing that I always try and do at conferences, try and meet with potential authors who want to pitch their ideas. So I tend to have, when I submit for publication, a top 5 of journals for my paper ideas, and then sort of work through them. You'll need to think about questions such as, are you going for a generalist journal? Are you going for a specialist journal? And then importantly, to go on to the next slide, make any framing changes if required. But if you are going through a list of journals, and I think it's been mentioned already in the discussion, if if you've had a reject from one journal and you're moving on to the next one, make sure that your framing is modified accordingly. So one thing that we often get at the Journal of Civil Wars, for instance, is we get a lot of work that is framed and embedded in the terrorism literature. Now, it's an allied field and to the study of civil wars, but it has a distinct set of literatures and debates. And we often get work that comes in without any real effort to pull the paper's focus towards the civil wars literature. There are, as I say, a lot of overlaps, a lot of commonalities. We certainly can, if you work on terrorism studies, you certainly can publish in civil wars, but there's just a bit of work that needs to be done to get that framing in order. Again, check the formatting guidelines. I'm not going to repeat, that's already been discussed. Check for Word document templates that journals and publishers may have. That can often do some of the work for you in terms of the fonts, the details, that kind of thing. That can make your life a little bit easier. Hannah referred to a really important sort of problem of having to convert references and it being a real pain. My advice is use a reference software manager, like an EndNote, Zotero type thing. It's not going to mean that you do no work at all, because sometimes the software doesn't always create things in perfect format, but it makes life so much easier in that when you go to a new journal and you think, right, what style are they adhering to? It's a different style. This is Chicago, this is Harvard. You can simply click convert. It'll do a lot of the hard work, and then you can just go through and make sure that it's all in order. So that's one thing that I would advise. Really important and not always done, submit a cover letter. Now, I always suggest that you submit a cover letter to whenever you're submitting a journal article. Some journals stipulate it as a requirement, but even where it isn't a requirement, I would still do it because I think it's a really important opportunity to communicate your article, to tell the editors a little bit about yourself, to sell your article, to frame it, to locate it in the debates and aims and scope of that journal. And there's a particular format which I find useful for doing that. So you can start with an opening paragraph. Got here that basically you're introducing yourself, and then a main body in which you summarize the article's contributions, its key findings. A third paragraph in which you demonstrate the article's fit with the journal. This is a really important opportunity beyond the article itself to show here's why this article fits with the journal. One thing that I think has already been mentioned so far, you may wish to gently suggest some suggested reviewers around this point. So this might include authors from the bibliography. It might include authors who you think might be interested in this work. It's useful for editors. Obviously, this needs to be done ethically. It needs to be people who you're not co-authoring with, for instance. You don't have an immediate sort of professional relationship with, but they may be in your field. They may be contributing to the same debates, similar approaches, for instance. You might also wish to include opposed reviewers too. That's something that we do also allow. If you think that there is a reviewer who we might likely turn to, who you think has a fundamentally different approach, perhaps a conflict of interest is there as well, you can also list opposed reviewers, and that can speed up the process for us, because that process of soliciting reviews takes a lot of time. Finally, in your cover letter, have a final paragraph with admin parts that states that the work is original, has not been published elsewhere, any statement of research funding, funding details, etc., and ethical approval of your research as well, which is becoming increasingly important across academic journals. So when it comes to us, we will do an initial screening. We will check whether an article has passed technical check, so that's similarity score, formatting requirements, for instance. We'll then check with aims and scope of the journal, and this is where framing is really important. Again, really important that you read the aims and scope of the journal. The amount of times that we, as the Journal of Civil Wars, receive these very specific articles about the American Civil War, and in the very kind of here's a family tree history of some particular soldier type situation, and that's really not what we're after as a journal, but we get it all the time. So many works on the US Civil War, we get it on Twitter, and yeah, read the aims and scope, because you would find that is not, we're not after personal family tree histories. So yeah, aims and scope. Is the content in the article generally of a good standard? That's something that we then have a quick look through to check. Does it make an original contribution? Do the methods generally appear rigorous? As editors, we make some initial checks on that, and this is really an initial screening. So here's just an example of our sort of system which we employ, in which we check various aspects of the submission. So is it within aim? Is it within scope of the journal? What's the cover letter look like? What's the title page look like? What's the similarity check look like? Is it anonymous? Is it fully anonymized, for instance? Make sure that that's the case, because it will get sent back to you if it's not. And then we'll have some check on content as well. What do we think? Is it good to go out for review, basically? We've talked about rejection already. Just think about it as an opportunity. Doesn't mean that your work's not good. At this stage, you might get a reject, and you know that's absolutely fine. Just take the article elsewhere. Peer review. So the next step is that the article goes out for review. You can usually check some kind of submission dashboard to check where your article is at. So for instance, the review process takes time. We have had some, especially since the COVID pandemic, we've seen a real qualitative shift in the amount of willingness to do reviews, and the time it takes for reviews to be completed. It has really been a challenge for the journal, but also for our discipline more broadly. That said, if your article says that it is with editor for more than 4 weeks, I would follow up the editors. Just sort of give them a nudge. It might be that the article that they haven't had their monthly process of reviewing manuscripts just yet. It might be that there's an issue that needs to be discussed in more detail. So it's just worth doing. It might be that it's out for review with one article, but hasn't gone out for review with 2 reviewers, and so it's still saying, the system's still saying that it's with editor. So there's a number of reasons why that might be the case. When it's out for review, check in after around 2 months for an update. Would be my time when I would start recommending that you follow up. Again, there's ways that you might be able to support the editorial process. So, for instance, if they're struggling to find reviewers, you could on a check-in, you might say, just wondering about the status of this article. If you need any more suggested reviewers, I'd be happy to suggest them. And that's been useful for us in the past, those kind of follow-up emails. So I do recommend that you do them. So when the reviews come back, there will be, that there will usually be one of 3 options. So either a reject, an invitation to complete major revisions or an invitation to complete minor revisions. That decision is usually made on balance and our interpretation of the 2 reviews that we've received, plus our own sort of perspective as well. A table of typical outcomes is provided there. Some of them are fairly straightforward. So if we get 2 rejects, you're going to, that's not going to proceed further. It gets a little bit more complicated when we have different recommendations. So a major revisions plus a minor revisions, typically we would lean on the side of caution and recommend major revisions, just so that the article has an opportunity to satisfy both reviewers' comments. A reject and a major revisions would typically result in a rejection, however, not always. We do have, as editors, we do have a say, and we do sort of interpret we sort of think about the article's potential and take into account a number of factors ultimately. So it is quite a subjective process. We will sometimes try and seek a third reviewer if reviews are inconclusive as well, and that can take time. Okay, decisions in. So a typical decision will include some editor's comments to sort of frame the reviews that you receive, and then the reviews below that. Study them carefully, as Hannah suggested. Give yourself some distance from them to begin with. So have a quick look, and then go and have a break for however long you need, and then start to digest. And that's a really useful way to process that review. It's a good opportunity to communicate with the editorial team. So, thank them for the decision. If it's revisions, state, I'm happy to be working on these revisions in the next few months. If there's any time frame issues that you may have, maybe you see some issues further on down the line, maybe you think that you're going to need a few more months than has been stipulated in the decision letter, it's a good time to have that conversation. And yeah, regular and respectful communication with the liaising editors. Engaging with the review. So develop your own strategy for collecting and responding to reviews. Organize that process, break points down from the reviews, put them in a table, an Excel, or a point-by-point Word document, something like this that allows you to ensure that you have systematically addressed every comment in the review. Make sure that you're providing a detailed, precise response to feedback. And yeah, to do this, a structured approach is really important. So usually when you respond to reviews on the journal system, there are 2 ways of doing this. There will often be a kind of comment box style input on the journal's website, and they may also ask you to upload a document, which is a response to reviewers' memo type document. If it's not clear where a journal wants the response to reviewers to go, use both. That just ensures that it will be produced on the PDF that goes to the reviewers, and that is really important that it goes to them. So a good response memo can be thousands of words. It needs to be detailed, systematic, obviously polite. You're sort of playing the game a little bit, aren't you? You might have a comment that's fairly critical, but just kind of discussing and saying, I really thank the reviewer for this wonderful comment, and kind of engaging positively and constructively with that comment. So refer to precise details. Do not simply say, I have addressed the points, done. Because that is not helpful for a reviewer. It's not helpful for us. It will extend the process. It will make reviewers have a harder time looking at your work. So I usually refer to page numbers, paragraph numbers. I highlight changes using coloured font and highlighted text. I paste changes into my response memos. I really go a bit over the top with it, but this is having seen some of the really good examples when I've been working on the journal. And that allows both ourselves and the reviewers to assess changes that have been appropriately addressed. So you might start your response memo with a sort of header letter that sort of thanks the editors and reviewers for engaging with the manuscript, and you can see again that sort of politeness, that sort of constructive way in which you're engaging with the work. You can summarize any processes that you've done in the memos, any conventions that you've adopted. Have you color coded certain parts of the response? Are there any other things that reviewers should be aware of when looking at your revised document? And then be very, very precise. So what you can see here, really detailed response to the comment, and then you can see specific pages in which response changes have been made. Highlighted text has come up in red there to show where that is actual text from the manuscript to demonstrate that a change has been made. It will then go back out for review, and again, you will have multiple rounds of revision. It can be up to 3, certainly in our journal's experience. So it can be a time-consuming process. Decisions at this stage may range from the following. So the reject major revisions and minor revisions, the most common sort of decisions. But then we also have now conditional acceptance. So you've done some revisions. You've addressed some of the concerns that the reviewers have raised, but maybe there's just 1 or 2 tiny little bits to just sort out. And with that, we would then say, right, conditional acceptance, we're not going to send this back out for review. You make these tweaks and we're going to proceed with publication. That often happens after 1 or 2 rounds of review, or alternatively, you've addressed everything, the straight up acceptance. Last, but certainly not least, proofing and production. This, you've had your article accepted. It's a wonderful moment. You're really happy, as you should be. Proofing and making sure that the text in your article is all in order, it's formatted correctly. It's the slightly easier part than the sort of heavy lifting of the intellectual engagement side, but take this really, really seriously. This is your last chance to tidy up any errors. Do not assume that others will tidy these up for you. There are processes, teams, procedures that the article will go through. It will get typeset, but check for new errors as well. It's a really, really important part of the process. Be really meticulous with this, because what you don't want to do, it's a proud moment having a journal article published. You don't want to get to the other side and see that there is a silly spelling mistake or a sentence structure that doesn't make sense in the introduction to your article or something. It's a bit of a shame when that happens. So just take that process seriously at the very end. So that's all that sorry I've gone on for a bit there. Bit of an information dump, but looking forward to any questions and conversations about this. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Alex.